In episode 2, Din Djarin and Grogu go to Mandalore to look for the hidden mines so he can bathe in the waters and become a member of his religion once again. The planet seems to be pretty roughed up, as expected, as the place was, quote, glassed by the Empire. But the atmosphere seems to be breathable after some readings from a droid, and Din goes further into a cave where he's ambushed by some sort of bipedal beast creatures who he's able to take down with some difficulty thanks to the Darksaber. And alongside Grogu, he delves further into the cave, which leads deep down into the now ruined city of Mandalore. And he goes deeper down with the help of his jetpack and Grogu's little floating sort of baby pod. They get even further down until they reach more cave-like areas, and find little remnants of armor and weapons, until Din specifically comes across a old helmet that's kind of covered in rubble. He picks it up, and then he's ambushed by some kind of robot that injects him with some sort of paralysis toxin or whatever, and takes him away while Grogu is able to escape. We cut to the robot taking Din away into its lair and putting him in some kind of cage and hooking him up to what seems to be some tubes that are stealing some of his blood for whatever reason. And then we go back to Grogu, who has just left the entire cave and has made it back to the ship, and is able to sort of use autopilot to take him to Bo-Katan to get her help. And after that, they set out back to Mandalore to save Din. And for that, while they're going back for the caves, Bo-Katan mentions some of the history of Mandalore and her role in the planet, that her being part of a powerful line of Mandalorians, and her having once ruled the place before Darth Maul came and took over. As she continues talking, she's able to find Din under the capture of this sort of robot thing, and she's able to fight it off a bit, and she gets Din out, and Din continues his whole mission of trying to find the hidden mines. But Bo-Katan's a little bit not up for that, thinking it's just kind of a myth, or at least not real in the way he talks about it, the waters of Mandalore having any real power or whatever. But Din is persistent and goes straight down until they actually make it to the hidden waters, and she reads a little plaque that has some history context for Din, sort of mentioning what the waters are actually for, but he just continues on taking off, his cape and putting away his weapons, and he goes, straight into the waters until he falls all the way down, and Bo-Katan goes straight after him, diving straight in. She's able to find him, but also finds the fabled mythosaur, which seems to just be kind of chilling there and might have been the one to pull Din in, but it doesn't seem to care too much after that. So Bo-Katan's able to get him out, and that's episode 2. In episode 3, we go straight after that, where Din wakes up, and Bo-Katan does not mention the mythosaur and just says that, he kind of misjudged how deep the waters would be. Din then takes a little vial and takes some water as sort of proof that he bathed in the waters, and then they go on their way out of the caves, and they then make their way back to Bo-Katan's fortress to get Din's ship back and settle all that. But then they're ambushed by TIE fighters, and they try to fend them off. Din decides to take a kind of risky maneuver and jump straight out of the ship and all the way down to the landing pad of the fortress where his ship is, uses a jetpack to soften the landing, and gets straight in and fights off some of the TIE fighters, splitting off the numbers a bit. This works, but there happen to be a lot more TIE fighters, as when they kind of turn around, they find that some of them bombed at Bo-Katan's fortress. So, that's just kind of it for them. They go out into space and find yet more TIE fighters after them, but they are able to go into light speed and evade them. And then we cut to the planet city of Coruscant, where at the Senate building there is a little sort of a, I guess you could say, TED Talk being conducted by a doctor, Dr. Pershing, played by Omid Aptai, who is an ex-member of the Empire, who we kind of saw a little bit in Season 1. And he's, talking about how he's now part of the rehabilitation program that the New Republic has started for ex-Empire members, and also, mentions that he hopes to make great medical progress for the New Republic, and, little bits about his childhood and all that. The talk is over, and he leaves, getting some nice praise from a few people, even though he is a little awkward about it, because he definitely doesn't seem like a social guy. But he leaves after that and goes to his sort of apartment, which is a special apartment block for these rehabilitated Empire people, where he comes across a few of them hanging out on at a sort of picnic table almost, and he decides to join them with some asking him to come over, and he talks to them. It has a little banter, sort of chit chat, talking about some of the little bits of the Empire, some things that they missed, mostly just small things like the food and some of the accommodations. Pershing kind of mentioned some special biscuits that they had, which he has a sort of play fight with them over the other biscuits, some red biscuits or whatever, and it's a little weird, but that's kind of Star Wars in a way. It's a little weird mixing the mundane real life stuff with the sci-fi, but it's kind of neat. Later on, he gets a sort of quote doorbell ring. It's sort of like, I guess, what you think of when you think of the Ring doorbells, digital doorbells. He answers the door and finds no one there, but looks down to see a box, and when he opens it, it's full of like those biscuits that you mentioned, and he's kind of happy about that a little bit. The next day, we see him at his job, doing some computer stuff, archival and all that, and has a little brief talk with some guy who's just kind of walking around doing his own job. Later, he meets up with one of the people that he met the other night, Kane, played by Caddy M. O'Brien, who wants to kind of hang out with him and talk about things in his life, all that. They at one point hang out at a sort of, I guess, carnival or whatever in the city, eating some sort of glowing popsicle almost, where they stop at what is supposed to be the last natural structure in Coruscant, which is the tip of a mountain that's kind of protected and kept the way it is, which is pretty nice, I guess. Pershing mentions his old research with the Empire and how it could have probably helped the New Republic, though they probably don't like the idea of cloning, which is what it was. But Kane kind of tells them to kind of persist with it and do what he thinks is right. So while having some sort of evaluation or whatever with a droid, he kind of brings it up near the end, but the droid mentions that it is prohibited. So he's like, okay, I'll leave it at that, and he goes, and he continues his job, where he finds some Empire research discs that are being meant for deletion, which is, of course, he hesitates with at first because he's thinking they could be used for good, but his superiors are like, no, you can't do that, we want to get rid of the Empire stuff. So he just does that, just kind of deletes that and moves on. But after a point in time, he feels like he could be doing better, so he goes to Kane's apartment and asks if he would be able to make a lab, because she mentioned that before, and where he could find all that stuff. Later in the night, he takes off his usual attire and puts on a trench coat or whatever, and both he and Kane go to the more I guess seedy parts of Coruscant and take a train. A bit later into the ride, they have to avoid some guard droids, and They end up making it all the way to the end of the train, where they have to wait for it to slow down, and then they jump off of it. Thankfully, cushioned by some, I don't know, soft, things being protected by a tarp or whatever. They roll off of that, and they end up being pretty close to their destination, which ends up being a old Imperial Star Destroyer, which I guess is being kind of scrapped for materials and all that. They make it inside the Star Destroyer and look around for a mini lab to, find the essential stuff to make their own little lab. They find it, and Pershing grabs what he needs and puts it into a big, kind of container, and they, make it out, kind of, hearing some noises that could be guards, so they try to book it, but they end up getting caught, having a big light shined on them from a sort of ship or whatever, and the authorities kind of come to grab them, but they let Kane go, and but Pershing is kind of kept held down by the authorities and is taken away. He wakes up and finds himself in a kind of a table set up in some room where a officer or whoever tells him that they're gonna reprogram him or something, because it seems to them that his programming didn't quite work, and that the Empire can always be a little sticky when it comes to how loyal they can make their people. But of course, Pershing knows that nothing's wrong, and that he was just doing what he thought was right, and notices Kane behind the glass next to them, and realizes that she tricked him or whatever, and is trying to tell the truth, but they don't listen to him and put him under a rehabilitation machine, and they all kind of leave except for Kane, who tells the guy controlling the machine that she's his friend and would like to watch him get rehabilitated, and the guy's like, okay, and he leaves, and Kane ends up dialing the machine to max, and I imagine that will either completely kill Pershing or maybe make him full Empire, but I'm guessing it's more the former. We then cut back to Din and Bo-Katan going back to where the other Mandalorians are, so Din can get brought back in after having bathed into the waters. He's able to give them proof via the water, which the armorer pours into some sort of vessel with some other liquid that is able to prove its authenticity, and initiate Din back into the Mandalorians, or at least their sect of it. But a little bit of a twist happens where, by proxy of Bo-Katan having gone into the waters herself to save him and not taking off her helmet during that time, she is able to be initiated into the Mandalorians herself, and she kind of accepts, and they sort of take her in with open arms, and that's the end of episode 3. These were both decent episodes. I'd say that episode 3 was the better out of the two. Episode 2 kind of not only felt pretty short, but also just a little meh. The parts with Bo-Katan in that episode were a little, I wouldn't say bland or annoying, more just for those sections with just her and Grogu, it didn't feel like she could carry those parts, but I think it was just serviceable enough. And while at first I was annoyed that most of episode 3 was just another, perspective, I understand that it's clearly there to set up whatever it's trying to set up with its, big threat or whatever, because I'm not too sure who's going to be the main villain of season 3, but I guess we'll kind of have to find out with that. I think it's kind of neat seeing how the New Republic treats the Empire for the most part, or at least some of the ex-members who kind of came forward and decided to be rehabilitated. But, that's about it. I'm glad this episode was longer than the other episodes so far. I know it's a lot to ask for, but I do prefer when a show has long enough episodes, or at least feels like they're long enough. Feels like there's a lot that I'm getting out of it. But again, that's just me. Decent enough. I'm excited to see where it all goes from here. I'm gonna give episode 2 a 7 out of 10. Pretty standard, but that's okay. And then I'll give episode 3 an 8 out of 10 for having some interesting enough ideas. I hope you enjoyed this Mandalorian review, and I hope you stay tuned for more. It would also be very nice if you made sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you can, and stay tuned for another video. It doesn't have to be this one. But I more importantly hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you soon.